Disease resistance is another example of genes that we see in plant genome, because now that we have the sequence, we can actually look at this and see these things. When you look at it, you see many of these clusters are duplicated here, represented by the green. So in grape, a major disease is powdery mildew. And in Europe, if you take all the pesticide that's put on all the agricultural plants in Europe, 50% of it is put on grape. Okay, so that is a huge amount. So when you're drinking your wine, think about the amount of pesticide that might be going on that. Well, it turns out that when you think about disease, there's different ways that we can approach it. So for instance, one way of approaching it is you might have natural immunity. Or if you think about how we work with, how we as humans deal with this in medicine, you can also take a drug and it may get rid of that, like an antibiotic. Or you can be immunized, and your body then can recognize it because it's had a history of seeing it before, and then it can defend against it. Well, it turns out in grapes, they have a natural resistance to these diseases. In their past history, they've experienced those diseases, and they have now come up with a strategy on how to deal with it. When the plant sees that powdery mildew, the wild plant sees it coming in, what it does is it says, okay, you're in these cells, I'm going to kill you. I'm going to kill these cells, I'm going to sacrifice these few cells so that then I won't get infected for the rest of. And this is not that dissimilar to what our immune system might do. So we know that wild grapes have this natural resistance because they've experienced some time in their past history, and they have a way to deal with it. So why don't we move it in? And why don't we move? Well, it turns out because, you know, they have a lot of baggage besides that disease resistance genes. Wild grapes, they don't taste very good. It turns out that wild grapes are actually male or female. And it turns out that beautiful bundle of grapes that we see is actually a hermaphrodite, right? And it turns out that we don't know what the gene is for male and female for sex. And then we also still don't know what all these genes are here. Most importantly, if we made those crosses, it turns out a grape plant doesn't become mature for fruit until 3 or 4 years. So we'd have to wait 3 or 4 years to even find out if it was the sex of the plant that we wanted. And so, for instance, now we're able to generate these genomes. I can generate a grape genome at about $5,000 now. It's a much smaller genome. It's 1/6 of the size of maize, right? And so I can start now looking, and I can use some other approaches to delve in and potentially identify some of these genes using a combination of the sequence and genetic approaches.